You know, you may have heard that an Oregon man is suspected in the killings of 4 different women and that he got out of prison early because Oregon Governor Kate Brown cut his sentence short. It's a bit more complicated than it sounds, but it also does highlight the issue of recidivism. People convicted of crimes who do their time then later get arrested for a new crime. We're going to dig into that issue tonight. It's our big story. Four women in our region were murdered relatively recently, and police say the deaths are connected. While investigators have not yet arrested anyone, we know they have a person of interest in the case. Willamette Week has reported his name is Jesse Calhoun. Calhoun has a criminal record in Oregon and was actually serving time before the women were killed, but he had the sentence commuted by Governor Kate Brown after he worked as an inmate crew fighting the 2020 wildfires. That point caught the attention of many of you. It also raised questions about how often an inmate reoffends after being released from custody. Now, we love to dig into data on this show, so that's exactly what we asked investigative reporter Evan Watson to do.
The reality is that being involved in criminality, sometimes it's, you're going to have some stumbles along the way to try to desist from crime.
Ken Sanchagrin leads Oregon's Criminal Justice Commission, the agency that tracks recidivism, or how often a convicted criminal goes on to commit a new crime.
We normally look at 3 years because it takes some time once folks are out to ensure that they're able to, comply with the rules of society.
The most recent numbers tell part of the story. About half of all people on parole or post-prison supervision in Oregon were arrested again within 3 years. More than a third of them were convicted for new crimes, and about 14% were sent back to jail or prison. If those numbers seem high, they're about 10% lower than the national average, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics.
We do feel like we're leaders in the country as far as reentry services in many cases. We still have a long ways to go, as evidenced by the numbers, but compared to some other states, we do feel like we're a little bit better positioned there.
Right now, recidivism rates in Oregon are at or near historic lows. The CJC found that Measure 110 and the decriminalization of drugs lowered recidivism rates by about 1 to 5% across the 3 categories, a smaller decrease than many thought they'd find, and not enough to account for the entire drop. And while lower recidivism rates might seem like good news, it's not necessarily because people are reoffending less often. They might not be getting arrested or convicted due to a shortage of police officers and public defenders.
We've heard from our law enforcement partners the difficulties they have in hiring, and so enforcement is something that is likely down. We had court slowdowns during the pandemic as well.
Sanchagrin says it's best to look at new convictions to measure success and failure in recidivism. That rate stands at 35% right now. He says investment in rehabilitation is how to lower it.
I think that it really demonstrates there needs to be continued support for reentry programs, for monitoring, for skill development. It's tough to take somebody and to not provide them with enough services when they first come out and expect them to do really well. But the more services we can wrap around folks, then the better outcomes we can expect.
We started looking at Oregon's recidivism data for context on the investigations into the killings of 4 women around Portland. So let's back up. During the pandemic, then Governor Kate Brown commuted the sentences of more than 1,000 inmates. Most were medically vulnerable or had only a few months left on their sentences. Brown also gave 1-year sentence reductions to 41 inmates who helped fight wildfires in 2020. One of those inmates was Jesse Calhoun. He was released 11 months early in the summer of 2021. We checked the records of the 41 wildfire inmates. 10 of them have been arrested for new felonies in the last 2 years. That doesn't include Calhoun, who's not been charged in connection with the deaths. The data, though, isn't directly comparable to recidivism statistics. While some inmates were released early, others had longer time to serve, so their sentences were just reduced. And while the Criminal Justice Commission is studying the recidivism of the hundreds of inmates Brown helped release in 2020, Sanchagrin tells me his office likely won't study the 41 wildfire inmates. He says it's a smaller pool and few cases can skew the numbers, plus the staggered release times, Pat, they add to a lot of the variables in tracking stuff like that.
So that's interesting. You also mentioned recidivism under Measure 110 was less of a drop than they expected it to be. What did they expect?
Yeah, the Criminal Justice Commission studied that when 110 was put in place, saying, hey, we might see some major effects here. The official report said 1 to 5%. That's kind of summarizing the 3 categories. Sanchagrin told me it's closer to 1% in a lot of the ways. So what they were directly able to attribute to Measure 110 didn't create as big of a drop-off for a decrease in recidivism as they would have thought based on just the overarching narratives around that. However, that doesn't encompass everything. The lower levels of enforcement, pandemic effects in the courts, public defender shortages, all things that we've talked about here in the story, those all play roles too.
All right, and then we also understand there's a push from Republicans to review more of these inmate firefighters?
Yeah, the 41 there Republicans have said, hey, we need to look at those and figure out what's going on with the 41 inmate wildfire firefighters and see about their cases. But that doesn't look likely at this point, at least talking to Sanchkin like I did. He said that, hey, those cases just are so varied and it's hard to compare. What they are doing are looking at the vast majority of commutations from Kate Brown's administration and making some determinations from there. We don't have 3-year data because it hasn't been that long since that happened, but the 1-year data shows it's in line or even slightly better than normal recidivism statistics, nothing outlying at this point.
Okay, interesting. Thank you, Evan Watson. Great reporting as always.
Thanks, Pat.